Are autism and ADHD disabilities? And if so, what does that mean exactly? Hi, I'm Essie. I'm an autistic and ADHD therapist. Today, I'm talking to you about how neurodivergence can present as an invisible and dynamic disability. The term dynamic disability refers to a disability that is shaped by a variety of factors. This includes environment, energy levels, mental health, and sensory input. While I wouldn't say that a neurotype like autism and ADHD are inherently disabilities, it's often the case that the co-occurring challenges are disabling. So for example, with ADHD, a common co-occurring challenge is executive dysfunction. For both autism and ADHD, having sensory sensitivities can also be disabling. In my book, Neurodivergence Game Plan, I talk about a concept called an SES bandwidth. SES refers to sensory, executive, and social. And we all have a finite ability to tolerate inputs on these three bandwidths. When we exceed those bandwidths, we become overloaded, we shut down, we might have a meltdown, and over time, we experience burnout. So while you might not visibly present as autistic or ADHD, you still have these sensory sensitivities, and while you can navigate the world pretty well for the most part, this can change as soon as you're exposed to excessive SES inputs. Likewise, if you don't need to have structure and self-organization, executive dysfunction won't be a problem. But if you have a family to tend to, a job to work, or other responsibilities, you'll find that your ability to complete activities of daily living and fulfilling all your various responsibilities can be very difficult. The fact that many autistics and ADHDers can present as confident and competent, possibly because they're masking and choosing to present themselves in a way to avoid being seen as an imposter because they can't do a lot of the things that their neurotypical peers can do, this can set up false expectations. Neurotypicals will think, oh, they should be able to do the things that I can do to tolerate the sensory inputs that I can. They should be comfortable with being in a noisy and crowded environment. They should be okay with multitasking and fulfilling multiple tasks in their job. And sure enough, this expectation is dashed when it becomes apparent that the neurodivergent might not have the ability to tolerate or accomplish these things that are expected of them. Just because they don't immediately present as disabled doesn't mean that they don't have aspects of their neurotype that are disabling. Traditionally, the medical profession has been using terminology like low and high functioning to classify the degree of challenge that the neurodivergent might be experiencing. But when we talk about dynamic disabilities, suddenly functioning labels aren't that helpful. Because the disability is not static, it's a little bit unfair to apply a label that can change based on context. For example, I'm able to work full-time and study full-time and still have a social life and balance all of these things because I've mastered my executive dysfunction. But if you put me in a noisy and crowded environment for more than, let's say, 30 minutes, I'll start to shut down and get overloaded and retreat into myself. And suddenly I won't have the confidence that I do in a one-on-one type social situation. I won't want to talk to people. I won't make eye contact. I will want to go back to my room and probably do some kind of restorative activity to recharge after feeling overloaded. But because people might only interact with me generally in a one-on-one context or are familiar with my professional persona, they might not understand that that is exactly what I just described, a persona that I put on and that I'm masking, camouflaging, or compensating for the disabling aspects of my neurodivergence. If we were to use these outdated labels, one could describe me as high functioning, but then that shifts in certain situations, so I can become low functioning depending on whether I'm in the right state of mind, if I'm fatigued, if I'm feeling anxious, or if the inputs are too intense. For many neurodivergents, having a dynamic disability means that they can often be barely functional. They might have extreme executive dysfunction that makes it hard for them to get out of bed or to attend a job. They might have really substantial co-occurring challenges like OCD, depression, and anxiety, or they may be in a prolonged state of burnout. And burnout usually happens because they've been hyperfunctioning to survive in a neurotypical and ableist world, while struggling with the downsides of this dynamic disability. For example, they've been expected to juggle multiple assignments at school, to meet the demands of a taxing job while socially interacting with their colleagues and dealing with sensory overload. And over time, this has corroded their ability to be resilient and has led to them having extreme exhaustion and losing all confidence in their ability to do the activities that are required of them. And often it's factors like this that contribute to a neurotype being perceived as a disability. In my interactions with many neurodivergents, they say, oh, being ADHD isn't great, or being autistic sucks at times because I have to deal with these problems. And I want to stress that it's important to separate and say, this is not the neurotype inherently. This is the challenge that presents with the neurotype. One can't change one's neurotype per se, but one can find more adaptive strategies to deal with these co-occurring challenges. A common stumbling block to overcoming these challenges is the fact that neurodivergents have spiky neurocognitive profiles. What I mean by this is that neurotypicals often have a pretty even profile in terms of being able to accomplish multiple things that are required of them, like self-organization, time management. They might have slight variations in terms of their ability to do different skills or accomplish certain tasks, but for the most part, there aren't extremes. Whereas with neurodivergence, there tends to be extreme strengths in a certain area and then extreme difficulty with other areas. And so there's a gross imbalance, which is why detecting dynamic disabilities can be difficult with neurodivergence. People see the extreme strength in a certain area, but they neglect to recognize that that person may have a weakness in another area that's crucial for them being able to live in this world. For example, many neurodivergents have an ability to hyperfocus, which can be great for accomplishing tasks, but they may also struggle with being able to get into a state of hyperfocus to start with. They might be a master of systems-oriented thinking, which can make them really strong in areas like mathematics or, let's say, physics, but they may struggle with alexithymia, that is, their ability to identify, interpret, and explain or express their feelings. Having a systems-oriented mindset can help a neurodivergent succeed in certain fields, but having alexithymia can impede their ability to express their feelings, to process them, and to have healthy relationships with others. Neurotypicals, because of their own slight variations in their neurocognitive profiles, may struggle to some extent with these difficulties, but not to the extreme that neurodivergents do. Many clients I work with grapple with this dynamic disability and the challenges it presents, and they ask me, how do I overcome this? How do I accomplish this task that I'm struggling with? And there are strategies for each of them, but the reality is the best one can do is learn to live with these difficulties as much as one can find strategies for overcoming them. Acceptance is key here. A lot of us get caught up in the cycle of fighting against the facts, of struggling with a disability, of engaging in self-blame, guilting oneself, self-flagellating, blaming yourself for being inferior. These are all expressions of internalized ableism. We've taken ideas that we should be able to meet these neurotypical standards, we've internalized them, and then we attack ourselves for not being able to achieve them, despite knowing that we have this dynamic disability. The practical challenges of having a disability, I believe, are nowhere near as substantial as the challenge of dealing with internalized ableism and the shame that comes with it. Treating yourself with self-compassion and acknowledging that it's not your fault and that there are other people who share in the struggle and that you're not alone can go a long way to easing this internal pressure that makes it so hard to live with a dynamic disability. This thinking is also rooted in this common narrative that society likes to celebrate of one triumphing over one's disability. We see lots of news stories of people who had substantial obstacles and found a way to succeed despite it. And I think this sets one up for failure because what one often does as a neurodivergent is compare oneself to other people. You say, this person was able to do it, why can't I do it? These should statements keep one in a state of paralysis and deeply entrenched shame because there's no way out. I think it's important to push back against these unrealistic narratives and to recognize that living with a dynamic disability is not a straight trajectory from problem to solution. The challenges we face can increase and peak depending on the circumstances, and then they can dip and disappear in others. The goal here is management and preparation. If you have a sensory sensitivity, I recommend, for example, carrying with you a little kit bag with all your sensory aids. A set of sunglasses to block sunlight, hat, sunscreen that's sensory friendly, earplugs to block out noise, or noise cancelling headphones. Little tweaks like this can go a long way to helping you survive in a world that isn't built for your needs. Again, treating yourself with self-compassion, engaging in mindfulness that's oriented around cultivating that self-compassion and reminding yourself that you're not at fault for having this disability. And in fact, you're very resilient and courageous for persisting despite it, and often without a lot of help. Communicating to others so that they understand what it means to live with a dynamic disability, and explaining to them the degree to which one has to mask, camouflage, and compensate for one's difficulties, because it's demanded of one as a neurodivergent, navigating a neurotypical world. There's a lot of emotional labor that goes into explaining to neurotypicals why we struggle, and there's always the chance that even with having explained it to the fullest extent, they might not still get it, and they might not make adjustments to accommodate our challenges. As much as it's important to communicate and self-advocate, one can't do that at one's own expense. If you don't have the energy to engage in that labor, to do the explaining, take care of yourself and be strategic about who you tell and who you explain these difficulties to, because not everyone is always going to understand. A lot of people will say, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But again, they might not adjust their expectations, and they still might hold you to this neurotypical standard and then cite you for falling short. The key here is self-acceptance. You didn't choose to have a dynamic disability. You didn't choose to struggle with the things you struggle with. This is what you've been given. This is your lot in life, and you're doing your best to manage it. You're not sitting on your hands and blaming other people. You're finding ways to navigate it. And yes, you could do with a lot of assistance and support, but the nature of living in an ableist society is that this help is often withheld. And the best we can do is self-advocate, communicate, and strive to be as resilient as we can by engaging in self-compassion, self-care, and being strategic about who we choose to engage with and when. A common phrase I like to use is not I should, but if I could, I would. I just need a little help. And as difficult as it can be to ask for this help, we are entitled to do so. I believe we all have a responsibility to advocate as much for ourselves as for others just like us. Society isn't at a point where it widely recognizes what a dynamic disability is, and nor is it making the necessary accommodations to make life tolerable for those of us who have to cope with them. When we speak up, we are spreading awareness. We're supporting the gradual transformation of society, one person at a time, towards one that is a lot more inclusive and compassionate. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and share it with anyone you think might benefit from my content. This goes a long way to helping other people like yourself find and benefit from my videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.